recognizing you're part of a broader community. What can you do to support that community? At a couple dozen employees, and we grew to a couple hundred employees, and then thousands of employees. At our peak, it was about 10,000 employees. But in the community broadly, suddenly, because we had so many people clustered in the area, happened to be around Dulles Airport, guess what? Suddenly homes were getting constructed in the area, and restaurants were opening in the area, and a lot of other services were being put in place to support that broader community. And the data basically says for every startup job, there's 5 other jobs that are created in the community. So if you're not focusing on these startups, by the way, it's not necessarily tech startups. Obviously, there are a lot of tech startups, but we're seeing innovation across the whole economy in food and clothing and many other sectors. If you're not focusing on that, you're not creating the jobs of the new companies. You're not creating the jobs of the kind of industries of the future, and you're also not going to be creating the related jobs in your community that will really lift up the community and give people more of a sense of hope and possibility. That is part of the problem we have right now in the country, where there is such a divide, and some people feel great about the future, optimistic about the future, but a lot of people, actually the data suggests most people, are anxious about the future. The disruption we talk about in places like Silicon Valley is bad for their family. It's bad for their community. It feels like job loss, not job gain. And we can only offset that if we're creating jobs in each city, in some of these new companies, some of these new industries, and also benefiting from the broader spin-off impact. So it's hugely important. It's not just about any one startup city. It's about how do you create a broader focus around new companies, startups all across the country. And if we don't do that, the divide we now have in our country is only going to get worse.
You talk about so many of these big shifts and these industries in your book, The Third Wave. And I've been thinking about that a lot this year, of just now that book looks even more prescient than it did when you originally published it. So I would encourage people to go and reread the Third Wave book, because I feel like it holds up really well for this year. Obviously, we've seen healthcare really transform this year. Obviously, communications has been very much disrupted this year. What are some of the other things that you're seeing just even in your portfolio, and the kind of deals that you're looking at that you're optimistic for in 2021?
Well, I would start by saying, obviously, the pandemic has had terrible impacts on our country, on the world. 300,000 people have died. I think the last number I saw was 16 million people were infected. Millions of jobs have lost. Lots of businesses have closed. It's been a tragedy on multiple levels. I don't want to make light of that. Obviously, it's been terrible. But like anything, sometimes when you have a crisis, underneath that, if you're paying attention, there's some glimmers of hope, some silver linings, if you will. And we're seeing that. And some of them are the broader themes we talked about at the beginning in terms of this migration of talent, which I think will accelerate the rise of the rest phenomenon. I think that will be very positive for a lot of cities, and over time also more broadly for our country. And you're also seeing some acceleration of some of the dynamics in particular sectors, and some of the obvious ones you mentioned, communications, of course. Zoom and many other companies have seen a real acceleration in their growth as we adopt think about this sheltering, working from home, not just being a temporary thing, but maybe a more permanent thing, or perhaps a hybrid workforce where some people are remote, some people are in the office, some people kind of switch back and forth. How does that change? And there are a lot of companies that are benefiting from that. We've obviously seen an acceleration in e-commerce and food delivery and a lot of other things. One of our companies, BigCommerce, we've seen that firsthand. Their commerce platform has seen rapid growth over the past year. We've also seen an acceleration of some trends in sectors like telehealth, which has been bubbling for really more than a decade, but really took off this year, not surprisingly, because doctors' offices were closed, and for at least many doctors' offices were closed. So suddenly, if you needed to see a doctor, you had to do it virtually, digitally. You had to embrace telehealth, and we saw that with one of our companies, Talkspace, which is in the digital mental health space, and they've seen significant growth over the past year. We've also seen companies pivot. One of our companies, Clear, is best known for airport security, kind of this fast path to get your plane faster. They decided also to expand into Health Pass and work with some sports leagues to create these safe bubbles for players and their families, and are now offering that to a variety of different organizations. So there are just a lot of things that were showing some signs of momentum and really have accelerated because of this. Some of this may go back to some sense of normalcy, if you will, but a lot of these trends I think are going to be more permanent.
Watching just the last several years, as you have been so vocal in the media and going town to town, talking about the big opportunity in tech and startups, we've definitely seen a benefit as a nation from that. What can we all be doing on an individual level? We all didn't co-found AOL, so maybe we don't have as big a media presence as you do, but the collective whole of all of us talking about what makes these cities great, or these startups great, or what makes it great to work in tech outside of Silicon Valley and New York City. What are sort of the day-to-day things that you would suggest anyone here on Unvalley or anyone who watches this video later could do to help support the Rise of the Rest movement?
Well, I think it starts with understanding that you're part of a community, and obviously you're going to focus on whatever you're doing, if it's a startup or whatever you're working on. Of course, that has to be kind of front and center, but recognizing you're part of a broader community. What can you do to support that community? What can you accelerate the community, which is a way to help the community, but frankly also help yourself, because if your city is rising and it's able to attract more talent, able to attract more capital, kind of all boats will lift. So in some ways it's self-serving, but it starts with not being self-serving. It's recognizing that there's a role you can play and really need to play in being part of your startup community, being a leader and trying to take it to the next level. The second goes back to what I said before, is it's recognizing collaboration is critical. There's an African proverb, you've heard me say a lot of times when I've been on the road: if you want to go quickly, you can go alone, but if you want to go far, you must go together. And so how do you build a collaborative effort so you can go together, including figuring out ways to connect with others in your community, including folks on the policy side, like your local mayor or some of the bigger companies, or as I mentioned earlier, universities. So how do you kind of create this broader community that really allows you together to do things you really couldn't do on your own? A third is to be successful. One of the great things about that really puts startup cities on the map is somehow a breakout success, and say, I didn't know we could do that. AOL happened to be one of those companies here in the Washington, D.C. area. Dell was obviously that in Austin, Microsoft, and then later Amazon was that in Seattle. More recently, ExactTarget, now part of Salesforce, as you well know, was that in Indianapolis. You're seeing more. Pluralsight just this week, it was acquired by Vista in Utah. When you see those successes, it creates a kind of a more of a sense of possibility and momentum. Just as the first time, until somebody climbed Mount Everest, nobody thought it was possible. Once one person did it, people said, well, obvious it's possible. I think I'll go do it too. The first guy to kind of break the 4-minute mile, most people thought that wasn't possible. He did it. Suddenly it was possible. Suddenly a lot of people are running sub 4-minute miles. And the same dynamic is true with these companies. Having a breakout success really lifts the community. Then some of the early employees, early investors have some capital, start investing in seed rounds, angel rounds for some of the companies in the area, or take their expertise and start their own companies, and momentum begets momentum. And so that's how you go from kind of a early stage kind of startup community to something that's really thriving. So there are a lot of different factors. And as I said before, and Brad Feld talks about this in his latest startup community book, this is really including what he found in Boulder when he started working on this, I guess more than a decade ago, almost 2 decades ago, is you needed to bring like a 20-year mindset to it. So there aren't going to be overnight successes in the startup community world. It's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of collaboration over a long period of time. I mean, you got to start somewhere.